Hello everyone, Space Oyster here, and welcome back to Let's Play Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. In the last episode, we cleared the Tomb of Wraithwall and got our first Esper, Belias the Gigas, as well as unlocking a secondary job for everyone. In today's episode, we're actually going to go through the secondary jobs. So, let's just go ahead and jump right on in. In order to unlock a second job for any character, you'll need to find this license called the second board on each of their license boards. So first, just some in general advice. When picking a secondary job for each character in your party, focus on picking something that will complement their current setup rather than trying to think of jobs that are complementary. Like, for example, on paper, Black Mage plus White Mage sounds like it would be good, but there's a huge amount of downsides to pairing up your Black Mage and your White Mage job. For example, you'd lose a lot of your gambits because you wouldn't be able to focus on healing or on offensive magic. You'd have to go one way or the other, and you can't do both. But it also creates a small problem with your augments. If two jobs have the same license on their board, it unlocks it on both of them if you unlock it on one. You're not combining or doubling anything if you pick two jobs with the same specialty, like a Black Mage and a White Mage. They don't get twice as strong at magic. You just unlock all of their magic-related augments faster. So, with that in mind, I'm going to give you a few recommendations for each job that should work well as a few recommendations on jobs to avoid, so that way your jobs work well, so that way you can avoid some bad combos. But at the end of the day, this game was designed to be played with each character in one job, so even if you go with the worst possible job combinations, you'll still get through just fine. But the dual job system will make everything a lot easier, but not so broken as like picking up the strongest weapons early on. Anyway, I'm pretty much rambling at this point, so let's start by unlocking Vaughn's second job and go over things that'll complement the Shikari. Now, the Shikari, I can see two beneficial routes that you can go with it. For the first one, I would recommend going with a mage. White Mage, Black Mage, or Red Battle Mage. The reason being is that the Shikari's strongest weapon is the Yagyu Dark Blade. It does dark element damage, and Mystic Armor gets the Dark Robes, which boosts the amount of damage you do with dark elemental attacks. This is the best way to boost the Shikari's damage to its maximum. So Shikari really wants Mystic Armor for the late game. However, if you're more worried about the mid to late game, then I would recommend a job that uses heavy armor. Primarily either the Ulan or the Foebreaker. I guess you could go Knight if you wanted to as well, but I'd recommend Ulan or Foebreaker above Knight. The reason being is that heavy armor boosts your physical attack stat, and it also allows the Shikari to take more hits from the physical side, and they can keep their light armor if they want to boost their magical defense higher than what they can get from heavy armor. Anyway, the job I have selected for Vaughn's secondary is actually the Ulan. I wanted to go with the heavy armor setup to make it easier for me in the mid to late game. The reason Vaughn wants Ulan for my story-related stuff is that the Ulan gets Vaughn access to heavy armor, which allows him to emulate Balthier. Since Balthier is a sky pirate, Vaughn just assumes that a knight sort of setup is what every sky pirate is like, or every good sky pirate. So Vaughn's going to try and emulate the knight, but at the same time, he also feels like that he's fallen off in importance. Like, the only reason that the group keeps him around is because of his combat prowess, instead of being actually useful to the party. So he's picking up Ulans to have access to spears, so that way he can hit flying enemies more easily than he could with just Shikari. That's my reasoning for Ulan. Now, as for jobs to avoid pairing up with the Shikari, I would highly recommend you avoid mainly Archer, Monk, and Machinist. The main reason being for all three of these is that the Ulan wants to get either heavy armor or mystic armor, and these three jobs would not offer it a change of wardrobe. A special note on the Machinist is that the guns would not utilize anything the Shikari trains up. The Shikari's training up their physical stats to be able to hit harder and faster, and Machinist guns won't allow them to do either. And then if you picked someone to be an Ulan as their main job, it's pretty straightforward what you should go with. I'd recommend either Monk or Time Battle Mage. Both of these jobs would give Ulan access to all three tiers of swiftness it otherwise would miss out on. With the Time Battle Mage, the Ulan would get some support spells that makes them very deadly, whereas with the Monk, it allows the Ulan to target either defense or resistance, whichever is lower. It gives your Ulan a lot more versatility. And as for jobs to avoid with Ulan, I'd avoid pairing it up with the Knight or any of the mages. With the Knight, the jobs are just too similar, and with any of the mages, Ulan lacks the ability to utilize magic other than time magic very effectively. So you'd really be minimizing what your character can do if you paired up Ulan and White Mage, for example. Alright, next, we're going to move on to Balthier. So the Knight class, let's unlock its secondary board, his secondary board first. The Knight has, as I said near the beginning, is that the Knight is one of the weaker jobs on its own. It's very slow, and it only gets access to swords, great swords, and a little bit of late game white magic. So, the main issues to fix with the Knight are that its speed, and that it can't hit flying enemies really well. So, pairing it up with an Archer or a Time Battle Mage makes it immensely more useful, giving it some good support options as well as a ranged option, and allowing it to hit the maximum speed. It also makes an interesting pair up with the Bushi. Since the Bushi gets Mystic Armor, it allows the Knight to function as a healer in the late game. As for jobs to avoid pairing up with your Knight, I already mentioned Ulan, and just like with Ulan and Shikari, avoid Machinist as well. Even though Machinist will speed the Knight up, it really does not benefit from having guns. Anyway, as for Balthier, I'm going to have him pick up Archer. Now, this might not be the best choice for Balthier personally. I think his attack animation with bows is slower than most everyone else's, similar to his attack animation with guns. However, I pretty much just ran out of room, and Archer was the only class left, and he was the only one without a secondary job selected. And I want to use all 12. Archer was the way to go. It does let him utilize items better, and I really will only be using the bows for dealing with flying enemies. So if you pick someone to be an Archer early on, you have a few options to go with for the Archer, but the two biggest ones to consider would be Red Battle Mage or, oh crap, what was the other one? Oh, I guess Knight, yeah. So Archer, if you pair it up with the Red Battle Mage, it actually allows the Red Battle Mage to be able to deal the most amount of fire damage possible. There's a weapon called the Burning Bow, and ammunition, the Fiery Arrows. If you equip those, all of your fire damage deals more damage, and Red Battle Mage learns the strongest fire spell in the game, Ardor. As for pairing it up with the Knight, the Archer pretty much just wants heavy armor, and Knight is the best way to utilize or capitalize on that, since the Knight already lacks a ranged option, unlike the Ulan or the Foebreaker, but you can use it with Ulan or Foebreaker as well. Alright, as for why Balthier is picking up Archer, well, as the leading man, he's already pretty good on his own, but he wasn't able to hit flying enemies, a weakness he noticed while going across the desert. So he just wants to cover up that one weakness, so that way he can be a better leading man. Alright, on to Fran. So the Foebreaker Um, I highly recommend using it mainly as a tank. So, I can really only think of one really good job to go with for the Foe Breaker. That would be Time Battle Mage, which is actually what I'm going to go with for Fran, spoiler alert. Anyway, the Time Battle Mage gives the Foe Breaker a lot more utility, allowing them to both buff their allies and debuff their opponents. It makes it a lot more useful. Foe Breaker could also pair up with the Shikari if you want to get access to a more reliable weapon type. I guess you could argue the same for Monk as well. As for jobs to avoid with Foe Breaker, well, like pretty much every other melee-oriented class, I'd recommend avoiding Machinist or the dedicated mages. White Mage, Black Mage, Red Battle Mage. Pretty much for all the same reasons that Ulan would avoid those classes. Yeah, and as for why Fran is picking up Time Battle Mage, it's just to continue to capitalize on her niche as the go-to party member for solving all of their problems. It expands her arsenal a lot, and she's going to be able to do so much as that. Now for White Mage. White Mage is where it gets interesting. I already mentioned Shikari. Shikari is a good option to consider for your White Mage. The addition of knives and shields allows them to be a lot more durable. It does keep them on the front line, but with the addition of shields, they won't be in as much danger. Another good option to consider pairing up with your White Mage is, of course, Machinist. White Mages have a low attack stat, so they don't usually do a lot of damage, even though they get access to Greatsword later on. Machinist allows them to compensate for their low attack stat by using a weapon that doesn't even factor in their attack at all. It also keeps them away from the front lines and out of danger, usually away from AoE effects that are going to be targeting your frontline fighters, so it's a good consideration. The one I went with that's actually going to work really well as well is Bushi. Bushi, since the katanas the Bushi gets deal damage based on your character's magic stat, it really fixes the main issue that White Mage had in that they just can't do a lot of damage all by themselves. And then Bushi also benefits from pairing up with the White Mage in that White Mage and Black Mage, and I think Red Battle Mage, get full access to all of the magic augments that Bushi would otherwise miss out on. As for jobs to avoid with the White Mage, I would recommend avoiding a dedicated melee job or another dedicated mage. So basically avoid pairing it up with an Ulan, Monk, Black Mage, or Red Battle Mage. In the case of the dedicated melee jobs, it would be splitting them up too much, making your character too much of a jack of all stats, and they wouldn't really be able to utilize their magic and their melee opportunities to their full abilities. And as for avoiding it with the dedicated mages is just, well, redundancy, especially in the case of a Red Battle Mage. And as for why I had Bosch pick up Bushi, is that while he is enjoying the fact that he's helpful to Ashe as a healer, he feels like that he's unable to assist the party more fully due to his lack of a damage output. So he's picking up the Bushi to fix his glaring issue. Like, he wants to overall be more useful to Ashe than he was to her late husband. Now, if you picked a Bushi as someone's main job, pretty much it has a lot of good options. I would highly recommend pairing it up with one of your mages. Definitely White Mage or Red Battle Mage, since their physical offensive options are otherwise limited. But it can also work well with Monk or Knight. Monk and Knight both get access to late-game white magic, so pairing them up with the Bushi allows them to utilize that magic with Mystic Armor to be able to do a lot more with it than what they normally would by themselves. As for what to avoid, well, this is going to sound very repetitive again, but avoid pairing it up with Machinist. And I'd also avoid Ulan or Foe Breaker, since Bushi doesn't want heavy armor like most other melee jobs. Alright, next up we got Ashe. So the black mage is missing only, well, 2 offensive magical elements. It can't do magical dark damage or magical holy damage. So fixing one of those gaps is your best bet. And the 2 best bets for fixing that, well, really, you can only get one or the other. If you want to be able to deal dark damage, go with the Shikari. With the Yagyu Darkblade and the Dark Robes, you'll be doing insane dark magic damage. Well, dark element damage. The other option is Monk. Since Monk gets late game white magic spells, that includes Holy, so it expands the Black Mage's arsenal and allows them to be able to use almost every offensive element. In addition, Monk gets a lot of HP augments, so it fixes the major problem that Black Mage has, and that it's frail. And unlike pairing Monk with White Mage, there's no redundancy here, since Monk gets late game white magic and Black Mage doesn't get any white magic. Black Mage can also work well with Machinist or Archer. Machinist for pretty much the same reasons as the White Mage, keeps them off the front lines, and I forgot to mention it, but it also adds to their support arsenal. And Archer, on the other hand, pretty much fills out the Archer's kit as a chemist by giving them the few item-related boosts that they're otherwise missing. As for what to avoid with the Black Mage, pretty much do the same thing you would avoid with White Mage, pairing it up with another dedicated mage or with a dedicated melee build. So avoid putting it with a Bushi or a Foebreaker. And if you've got someone in the Monk class, there are actually a couple routes you can go with it. Monk is useful for augmenting other jobs, thanks to the access to poles being a ranged weapon, their high HP, and their access to late game white magic. So it's usually more of an augment for other types of jobs. But on its own, Monk would probably want heavy armor more, so I'd recommend pairing it up with either an Ulan or a Knight or a Foebreaker. So that way they can get access to that heavy armor. But it also works well with the mage jobs. Let's see, and as for why I have Ash picking up Monk, well, she just wants to stick with the whole dedicated power thing, or the power thing. So she wants to simply expand her magic arsenal with holy spells, well, the holy spell, and in a pinch she can whip out a pole and start beating people to death with it. It does mean she's only going to be able to target resistance, but I don't see that as too big of a problem. Finally, we're on to Red Battle Mage, and by process of elimination, you know I'm going to pair it up with the Machinist. So Red Battle Mage plus Machinist works well because Red Battle Mage gets access to early game time magic and Machinist gets access to mid game time magic. So by putting the two jobs together, you're effectively making a time battle mage without actually choosing the job. You do miss out on a few key spells, namely Break and Hastiga, so don't consider this an actual time battle mage. Just a miniature one, I guess. Another job that works well with the Red Battle Mage is, of course, Archer, as I mentioned, the Burning Bow and Firing Arrows combo. And you might also want to consider Bushi if you want to go that route. As for what to avoid with the Red Battle Mage, take your best guess. Dedicated mages and dedicated melee builds, so White Mage and Ulan, more or less. And then finally, with Machinist, like I mentioned with Knight, it's a weak job by itself. And what it wants to do is probably be a bit more supportive. So it's kind of tough for me to recommend something for Machinist, since any other job completely changes what it would do. Machinist is more of a augment type job than it is a main job. That said, I would recommend picking the Red Battle Mage, so that way you can get access to all that support related stuff that you would want, or with the White Mage, so that way they can heal better. And as for jobs to avoid, well, it's kind of tough to tell you to avoid foe breaker and other stuff like that, since that would maximize the damage output. But yeah, avoid those, because the machinist would want to stick to their guns, and that would make the gun redundant or superfluous. As for why Penelo is picking up the machinist, it's because she wants to be able to stay off the front lines and support the party more, both of which the machinist allows her to do. Now I just need to pick who gets Belias. Espers essentially serve two functions in this game. The first and less useful function is that Espers allow the character to summon them, and then the Esper will stick around for a few minutes, I think, and just generally be an assistant to whoever summoned them. It's not all that useful though, since whoever summons the Esper will be replacing their other two party members with that Esper. So they're not always useful, since you're essentially trading two party members for one, and that one party member, you have limited control over them. You can't change their gambits or anything, but you can control them in the Zodiac Age. I should be able to show that off in this upcoming boss fight. Anyway, I will call that an episode. Next time on Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age, we will actually be doing something. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to comment and either leave me a like or a dislike, whichever you prefer. And I will see you all next time. Space Oyster signing out.